Okay, and we are live. Okay, so this is Small Business Saturday podcast with Attorney Justin Camper, and this is going to be such a fun podcast today. We are live on YouTube, live on Facebook, and I know people are coming in. And we got a really distinguished guest today, and I'm so excited to have this very important discussion that's really on the hearts and minds of a lot of Americans. So I want to do a little bit of a brief introduction, and I'm gonna let them go in and introduce themselves. But we have Professor Derrick Carter, and he is the real Annalise Keaton. Okay, everybody loved that show, How to Get Away with Murder. Well, we have the real. That was TV. This is the real Annalise Keating, one of the greatest law professors, one of the GOAT. I would say one of the GOAT law professors out here. And he was a former public defender, great expert in criminal law. He's going to be giving his thoughts on guns and the criminal system here in America. We have his son here today, Attorney Brandon Carter. He is a criminal defense attorney, immigration lawyer located in Illinois. So I'm really glad to have his perspective here. And then we have, last but certainly not least, former prosecutor and now criminal defense attorney. She joined the bad side. No, I'm just kidding. But we have former prosecutor, former law enforcement officer, Natalie Williams here today, and she has a very interesting perspective on guns and the criminal system. So I'm really glad to get involved with that. And so hand claps to you guys. I'm so happy that you guys are here. And so we have some people watching. For those who are watching, feel free to let us know. This is an interactive podcast. So if you have any questions or thoughts or anything like that, feel free to chime in. Let us know who you are and where you're from. So again, I'm Attorney Justin Camper. I do business law and I do criminal defense. I'm located here in Northwest Indiana, and we're having a discussion today to talk about guns and the law and solutions, and mainly I want to talk about the criminal justice system, because I think that's a big part of when we talk about gun laws. I think also that it's an extremely important discussion, and most people stick in their corners. They don't talk to people who have different opinions. And so, we are people who actually, do the law, right? We're not just people who, watch Fox News or CNN and get our perspectives. Like, we've actually out there in the field. And so I wanted to have my distinguished panel first just kind of start off with, what is your experience with guns? And, in general, what are your views? Would you say you're pro-gun? Would you say you're anti-gun, or somewhere in between? Or you can say what you lean toward. I lean more anti-gun, lean toward pro-gun. So anyone can start. I guess we can, we'll start with you, Professor Carter.
So the question is,
it's a twofold question. It's a compound question. I know you're not supposed to do that, but I'm doing it. What is your experience with guns? Your evolution on guns, and then also, what are your personal views? Would you say you're more leaning towards more pro-gun, or are you leaning towards more anti-gun?
Well, it's whether it can be pro-gun or anti-gun, but I am, if you have to label it, I guess pro-gun is an equal measure. So my experience, I think my son, so for many years, I had him growing up in martial arts, starting at age 5, and he always, around age 12 or so, as I recall, he always wanted to stop at the gun range that we passed in Chesterton, Indiana. It was a beautiful place. I said, no, because I was like you, Justin, from what I recall. You were sort of in one of the classes anti-gun, because being in Chicago, seeing all the violence, people feel this animosity towards guns because the news is projecting that as the primary reasons for all these killings.
Mhm.
And so Brandon convinced me. Okay, finally, geez. And I was amazed. As soon as we entered Range Master, there was a black Navy SEAL who managed the place. This is in Chesterton, Indiana. And just the little things that captured my attention, how friendly the people were in the gun range. You know, hey, come on up, I'll teach you how to. But all the other people, I thought it was the gun range was just be a bunch of redneck Yahoo.
Right.
That is, we've never found that the case. The whole Brandon and I throughout the show will talk about when we attended the NRA convention in Indianapolis, our experience at other gun ranges. And so as soon as eventually we started shooting, I saw the power of the Second Amendment. And I said, they're never going to give up these guns. And I said, oh, that's what it's all about. They'll never give this up. And that started the foray into guns. And then as a law professor, I started teaching criminal forensics. And part of that, we're studying ballistics, study of guns, homicide. And I had my students, with many police officers and military officers as trainers, come to the gun range. We learn about guns, and then they come to the gun range to shoot, to get the experience of the guns. You should have seen the smiles afterwards because it's target practice. And that represents the experience. Then Brandon and I, go to gun ranges. He more so than I, and he can get into that. And so I see both, like Professor Israel spoke in the other show, as it's a philosophical issue, a political issue of equalness that we have to consider. The importance of guns. And so if you put it in that kind of label, I'd have to say I'm for guns. It's God made people equal. So I forgot how the phrase, God made man, but Sam Colt made man equal. Is a famous phrase at the gun shows. So
Okay, I like that. Yeah. Yeah, well, thanks a lot, and I'm gonna go to you, Brandon, next. But I want to shout out these viewers. We have Danny Baker watching. He's a Superior Court bailiff, former military security forces personnel. Thank you, Danny, for watching. We'd love to hear your perspective. And then we have Kyle from Chicago. Thank you, Kyle, for watching. Who else you want to shout out? And if anybody else want to give their thoughts on guns, feel free to do so in the comments. So we're going to go to you, Attorney Brandon Carter. What's your experience with guns, and what are your views? Are you leaning pro-gun or anti-gun? I guess you're pro-gun based off of your father talk, but go ahead.
Sure. Well, yes, I would say if you had to go one way or another, I would say I'm pro-gun.
Right.
My history with the guns, as my father explained, I've always found them fascinating. I'm not the only one. I would say anybody, whether you're right or left, can see guns as an interesting topic, either through sportsmanship or hunting or self-defense. So there's an allure to them, regardless of your opinion on them. So I found them interesting in that regard, but then also the whole concept of self-defense. But I can acknowledge the fact that there's different walks of life. So people might have been, harmed by guns in the past, might have a different experience with guns, either through gang violence, or perhaps they just want to have one for any kind of self-defense or sportsmanship reason. But I think in that, so when I say I'm pro-gun, I do acknowledge that there should be some kind of background check. But the thing that I find most interesting is at what point do the checks become almost predatory? So in a sense, in the Chicago area in Illinois, yes, they have the background checks, but there's also a lot of details for FOID cards, for concealed carry cards. And if you don't adhere to every single point of how you have to maintain your gun and keep your gun, even if you have a FOID card, you can still find yourself with a felony. And a lot of times a lot of times those felonies affect the Black community. In fact, people will say, since I do criminal defense, "Oh, Brandon, how do you feel representing criminals?" But then I feel fine because most of the cases I deal with somebody who had a gun, sometimes even with a Floyd. They're not pointing at anybody; they just have it. A lot of times they have it for self-defense reasons, and they find themselves with a felony. And so that's why, as I say, a lot of times I feel fine doing this because sometimes I see there's a predatoriness in this, and it's a lot of times if I don't know if this is the right term for it, but I feel like it's almost kind of like a wolf in sheep's clothing. Sometimes they use the whole concept of, oh, we're doing this for the protection of the community, but a lot of times I would say it feeds into the prison industrial complex, just to round up people to throw them into prison for nonviolent crimes. In a way, it kind of even reminds me of how marijuana used to be. You found a lot of people, a lot of times in the Black community, thrown in prison for weed. It's a felony. And so this is almost kind of reminding me a lot of that. So in a sense, I would say, yes, I'm pro-gun, but it doesn't necessarily mean I'm like, oh, no background checks. I believe in the background checks, but I just think there's a line that has to be addressed at some point.
Ooh, okay, that was a lot there. Just to recap, so Professor Carter mentioned that it was actually you, Brandon, that interested in guns at 12 years old, correct? You were interested in guns and wanted to see about the gun range and all that. Was that correct? That was the right age?
Yes, I would say, because he'd always used to take me to martial arts and things. We always would drive by a place called Rangemaster. It'd be this big building, big long building. There weren't really windows you could see inside, but you knew it was a gun range. Mm-hmm. And so it was always kind of like a mystery box. You see the building, you see the sign, you see what's in there, what's it like in there. Especially for somebody who's never been exposed to guns or anything. It's almost like there's guns in there. So already the gun itself is almost kind of like an allure. But then also like the size of the building, everything else like that would make you even more curious. Mm-hmm. And that was an interesting thing too. When we went inside, people were very friendly, and that wasn't just there. Almost every single range I've been to, any gun store place, and this is in Illinois, Indiana, Florida, other states, they've all been very friendly, and it's not like they all happen to be on the left or something like this. A lot of them, to be honest, were blatant conservatives, right? But at least they could put their politics aside to be respectful, be kind, and everything else. And so that also kind of made it welcoming to get into the gun community because you didn't feel like it was gatekeeping by the right. They kind of felt like it was open for people to be exposed and to learn about firearms.
Okay. There's a lot there I want to hit on, but I'm going to go let Natalie go. So Natalie, if you can just give us your personal experience with guns and what are your personal views? Are you anti-gun or pro-gun?
Well, I am pro-gun within reason. I'm from North Carolina originally, from a small country town in the middle of nowhere. There's a lot of farmland. So I grew up with guns. My dad and my mom have double-barrel shotguns and rifles. Guns were a custom in my home. I knew not to touch them. I knew where they were. I knew not to touch them, though. You don't touch that. It's an emergency situation if you are to need to grab that gun for some reason. But we lived in a neighborhood in the middle of nowhere, so no one came down our street unless you lived down our street, basically. But my first experience with a handgun, I think, was about 12. And I shot a .380, and my uncle gave it to me. And we're in my backyard. And I said, I want to shoot that. He just bought it. He said, you sure? I said, yeah. So I took the gun. I had shot the rifle before. I shot the gun, and man, that thing had so much power. I went flying into the house, like literally in the brick wall in the backyard, because I was a tiny thing back then. But it didn't make me fearful of guns. It didn't make me more fascinated about guns. It just made me more aware of the different power that they can have, I guess, per se. Then going into college and being a criminal justice major, initially leaning towards law school, but then veering off that path, going into law enforcement, having to go to the academy, having 4 weeks of, basic academy training, and then going to additional 6 weeks of intensive training specifically for firearms and tactical training. Gives you a different perspective where you have to learn your gun like the back of your hand. You have to learn how to maintain it, how to clean it, how to take it apart. Every mechanical mechanism whatsoever definitely gives you a different perspective on a handgun, and definitely target practice, learning how to shoot and properly shoot a gun. But I can say all of my 13 years, I think I've never had to pull my weapon on a human being, ever. I've only ever had to pull it on a dog, thank God. But I can't say that for some of my other counterparts, But I've never had to use it on a human being. I typically try to use, the levels of continuum force reduction. I talk my way down, calm them down before I would ever have to try to pull my weapon out against somebody. But I am pro-gun within reason. That being said, because I had to go through an extensive psychological evaluation to be hired. When I say extensive, I mean like a 2,000 question psychological exam, and then talk to a psychologist for like 4 hours to be approved, to even go to be hired. And then once you get through the basic academy and then you go through the intensive school, your trainers are monitoring you and watching you, and they give a recommendation to say, are you mentally fit to still carry that firearm? Because if you're a hothead and they're like, nah, they're not ready. We don't want hotheads on the street. We don't want cocky people on the street because they're dangerous. They will shoot first and ask questions later. Those are the ones that we see the videos about typically on YouTube. We didn't want those on the street. So they would give recommendations and say, no, they're not ready. So it definitely gave me a different perspective. So I'm pro-gun within reason. I feel like if I have to do that to make sure I'm patrolling the street safe and to keep the community safe, the common citizen who wants to carry on their hip out in person should at least have a basic examination of clarity to make sure they are not incompetent to carry and that they must take a gun safety course.
Okay.
It's like you just can't pick up a handgun and don't know how to care for it. So many people carry their handguns and they go to the ranges or whatever and they shoot it and they never clean it. And then they wonder why they accidentally shoot themselves, or their children grab it and accidentally shoot themselves from backfire. Well, that's why it's never been cleaned.
Yeah, I mean, okay.
There are issues to that. So I think those things should be made mandatory. I'm in Indiana, and I'm very upset about this repeal of the gun license requirement. I think that's asinine and retarded.
Okay. But that was going to be my next question. So you actually lead it. So I wanted to talk about Indiana versus Illinois. Illinois, as most people know, is very strict on gun laws. When it comes to gun laws, they have probably one of the most strict gun laws in the country. And then you have Indiana that just came out with this new law. So I'm going to give a very brief explanation of it all, but I want you guys to talk about it. I'll let you go first, Natalie, since you already got into it. But I want to know your thoughts on the Indiana gun law and the Constitution and it versus the Illinois law. So Indiana, they just recently passed that anybody over the age of 18, that fits what they call a quote unquote proper person, can carry can carry a weapon, all right? Can carry a firearm, and they don't need a license. They don't need a permit. They can carry it, right? Now, there's a bunch of exceptions to the rule. You can't carry it on school property. There's different exceptions. But in general, you can carry it. The purpose was that the lawmakers said was that it was about increasing people's ability to defend themselves and their families. And then other people say it makes it easier for criminals to get guns. Now, a lot of law enforcement are upset about this because they said, "Oh, now we can't arrest people for guns, and now they can, they can't use that as an excuse to search people's cars and things like that." But and also, businesses have a right to prohibit people from carrying guns like that. Now, in Illinois, and Brandon can go a little bit more in detail about this, but in Illinois, you can get, if you carry a firearm without a permit, you can get at least 2 charges. I mean, it's other charges on top of that if you're a felon and things like that, and if you do anything with it. But just carrying a firearm, I know there's at least 2 charges. That's number 1. Illegal possession of a firearm, which is a misdemeanor, and that's just carrying it. But you can't have the bullets in the gun, and it has to be, if you just carrying a gun without the bullets, that is illegal possession of a firearm, which is a misdemeanor. Is that correct, Brandon?
Right. So they call it a UUW, unlawful use of a weapon, but use is kind of a strange term. It's more like even if it's possession. So you're right. There's misdemeanor, UUW, and there's the felony. So a lot of times they can easily upgrade it to a felony. There are bullets in the gun,
Right.
How they kept it, proximity to the person. So,
Right.
Yeah. So, yes, you're right.
Okay. And so, right, I wanted to make sure that's the point. So you can just having a gun without bullets in it is a charge. Then if you have bullets in the gun, you're not using it, you're just carrying it. You have a gun with bullets in it. That is a level 4 felony. Is that correct?
Yes.
A level 4 felony. Okay. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty high. That's up the felony chain just for carrying a gun. So I want to, Natalie, I want you to talk about. I'm sorry, because we have such a limited time. I'm giving you guys compound questions. So, but I'm going to address Danny some comments, and then I'm going to throw it right back to you. So Danny said, permits, FOIA cards are really nothing more than money grabs. Background checks and many mental health checks are necessary, but annual certification can be a way to make sure people are safe. Okay. Illinois gun law doesn't work. In Indiana, they are carrying anyway. Okay. So, Attorney Williams. So I want to know your thoughts versus Illinois versus Indiana. Which law would you say is, I guess, helpful for society, and which one is the closest interpretation to the Constitution, meaning the Second Amendment?
I don't think either one of them are helpful to society, and neither one of them are close to the purposes of the Second Amendment, to be honest.
Okay.
The Second Amendment in itself, when we were given the right to bear arms, was not designed for the purposes of carrying it on your body. It was designed for the purposes of protecting your property in your home.
Okay.
That's what it was created for. It was never designed for us to carry it on our body on the street. That's not what it was created for. It was designed to protect your property against the militia coming in to take your house. Historically speaking, that's what it was for. And now it's over about carrying it on your body to quote unquote protect yourself. But in Indiana, prior to them removing the gun law, possession of a handgun without a license was a misdemeanor. And then your second charge made it a felony, right? So I have a lifetime permit. I had one prior to the gun law being repealed. So I went through the process of my background check. I paid my fee. I waited my limit, and I got my license, my lifetime permit. It is, they're claiming that it's a restrictive process, but it's not a restrictive process. This whole removing of the license now says that anybody can carry without a permit. So guess within restrictions, convicted felons still can't carry. But you don't know a convicted felon on the street. They can't wear a sign that says, hey, I'm a convicted felon, or I'm a domestic abuser. Or hey, I've been, unlawfully committed to the mental hospital. They can't wear that on their shirt, but they can walk around with an AK-47 on their back at a gas station, which I've seen.
Okay. So I get.
And no one can say anything to them anymore. So since, and I know, and just in these research facts.
Well, what about Illinois? I just want, because I know you kind of, I get your point about Indiana, how you think that's dangerous. People should. What about Illinois?
The whole thing, the unlawful possession of a weapon with no bullets in it as a misdemeanor versus bullets in it now being a level 4 felony is insane. Who's going to carry a gun without bullets?
Okay.
That's insane and definitely is. That's stupid. It's stupid. Okay. And I do think some of these laws are targeted for African American community. I mean, they're just absolutely asinine.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Natalie. So, and I want the audience, I know Danny gave his thoughts, but I want what are your thoughts on Illinois versus Indiana gun law? Which one of the cards, anyone, do you guys want to respond to Natalie's comments about Indiana, or just in general, your thoughts on Indiana gun law versus the Illinois gun law? Which one is the Constitution?
Quick observation, kind of like comparative observation between Illinois and Indiana, and kind of go into like the immigration side of things. So sometimes people before would say, like, we'll kind of demonize, neighbors south of the border in Mexico by saying, oh, there's so much violence in Juarez. They keep getting these guns, keep harming the community and all these things. Where are they getting them from? A lot of times they cross the border and go to gun shows in Texas, where they'll have these, go through a private buyer and things like this, buy them for cheap, transport them easily back to Mexico, and then they kind of do their thing down there. And it reminds me a lot, actually, as to why between Illinois and Indiana, because a lot of times, these guys will just go to Indiana, where it's really easy to buy a gun, and then bring it back to Chicagoland area, do their thing down there. So I guess with that being said, I can see that, I can see why Illinois is the way it is, and I can see why Indiana is the way it is. But at the same time, I feel like they're kind of both kind of counterintuitive. They both kind of like harm more than they help. So with that, I guess they kind of, I would say for Illinois, they kind of go after and trying to be so broad sweeping with how they I guess go after these crimes. A lot of times they get innocent people. A lot of times they get people who weren't ever involved in any kind of gang, things like this. And at the same time, in Indiana, they know that's the situation of like how that happens with the Chicagoland area. So I don't know why they would make it even more lenient. It was already like not that bad to get a gun in Indiana before they made it even easier with open carry and things like this. So there's no real reason to make it even easier, knowing that in Illinois, they're making it so strict. So it's like this weird, they're going in opposite directions from each other, despite the fact that they share a border. And a lot of times people from Illinois might live in Indiana and vice versa. So it creates this really complex situation in the relationship between the two states.
Okay.
I'd come at it a little differently than Natalie. The Second Amendment and the Supreme Court has too. I think Indiana is more in line with the recent Supreme Court rulings of Heller, of McDonald versus Chicago, and the most recent case, New York Rifle Association versus Bruin, where after long historical analysis, the Supreme Court says the purpose of the Second Amendment wasn't just to have the right to have guns at home, but it was to keep and bear arms. Most of the dangers are when you're walking around in public. And they give each justice gave an exhaustive opinion, recognizing that it was the purpose of the Second Amendment. You need that. Most of the dangers are when you are walking around. And so Indiana's liberalized it, and I agree with Brandon, it was already pretty easy. Now it's like real easy. But I think the catch will be to see, where you're going to see. Right now, there's not been, from what I know, an uptick in mass shootings in Indiana. There hasn't been there has not been an uptick this year compared to last year. There has not been an uptick since this statute was passed.
And Gary, since July 1st, Professor Carter, there have been 14 murders.
There were 14 murders last year. For Christ's sake. The only time it was down was during the pandemic.
So, July 1st to now has been 14, and 7 of them took place on July 4th, the exact same day as the Highland shootings in Illinois.
Well, the gun, as was said in the other shows, Illinois strictness, New York strictness, these places where they have these strict gun control laws, and they have this rampant crime, has done no good in terms of stopping crime. And this approach that, we can just legislate crime away by picking and like tightening gun control with restrictions is not working at all. It's all these underlying factors which is causing it. And so in terms of comparing them, I think Indiana is more in line with the recent Supreme Court rulings, with the federal court rulings, than Illinois with the strictness. And so what can you say about that? I mean, by comparing them, what is your purpose, Justin, in terms of doing what with it? Because so what? One state is this way, the other state is more strict, but yet crime is probably more rampant in Illinois.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it's for that very purpose. I want to point out what is actually better for society as well. But I know you guys brought up the mass shootings, and I want to just bring that up. So I wanted to compare, if this is a fair comparison. If it's not a fair comparison, let me know. But Illinois and Indiana had 2 recent mass shootings. Mass shooting can mean a lot of different things, but the ones that made the news, I would say that. But Indiana had the Greenwood mall shooting, and just a brief thing on what happened with that was, there was a guy who started shooting openly in the mall, and then there was another guy who actually had a gun on him, who ended up shooting the guy before he shot more people. I think he did kill 3, but he could have killed obviously a lot more. Technically, the mall had rules against carrying a weapon inside the mall, so he technically broke the mall rule, I guess. But he didn't break the law because Indiana, the criminal system, because Indiana's an open carry state. Now, in Illinois, there was a Highland Park parade shooting in the Highland Park suburb of Chicago, and this guy had a AR-15 style rifle. And he basically just unloaded on people during the parade. I believe at least 7 people got killed from that. This guy had a expansive gun collection, and he bought all this stuff legally. So I'm gonna give it to you, Natalie. We'll go get to the comments, and then I'll give it back to you, Natalie. But what are you guys' thoughts on that? Does that change based off of the response of the 2 shootings? Does that help, shape your views on whether Illinois or Indiana law is in alignment or is good for society? So we're going to go to Danny first. He has said, you can buy a gun without a license to carry, jacket, and a successful background check. These laws will remain racially biased, okay? And he said, wow, Natalie, everything is the same, because I think Natalie made a comment that these laws are the same. So, but go ahead, Natalie.
The mass shooting that happened in Illinois, specifically, that young man's father was a political official. He had a noted mental illness. Mm-hmm. The police have been called to that man's house multiple times, mm-hmm, regarding his mental illness, regarding threats he had made to his home, to his family. Months prior, he threatened to kill the entire family with knives. The police came and removed, 20-something knives from his house? And they said they didn't have probable cause to arrest him, which is a lie. That is sufficient enough to arrest somebody. When they make a threat to kill people with specific weapon, and they find those weapons in the house where the child is, where the person is, that's enough to detain. They did not do so because his father was a political official. His father co-signed for him to get all of those weapons.
So I mean, does that change your view on the gun laws at all, or
it doesn't? I think in that regard, I mean, Illinois' gun laws are strict, but in that regard, that kid should have never been able to buy a gun. His father should have never been able to co-sign for him to purchase a gun. In my opinion, there should be something held against his father for co-signing for a handgun for his son, who is deemed mentally ill.
Yeah. And so, what are your thoughts on the Indiana Greenwood Mall shooting?
These, I just have my own opinion about these assault rifles. I don't think they should be legalized. I don't feel it's necessary for them. These are military weapons that should not be sold. They're military weapons.
But
they're designed for the military and police. They're not for regular people.
Okay, but under your suggestion you just made, you said that essentially, well, you were trying to interpret this Second Amendment, but you're not necessarily for people carrying handguns, correct? Or carrying guns.
I'm okay with people carrying handguns, let's say within reason.
Okay.
Within reason. If you are licensed to carry and you have gone through your proper procedures and protocols and you've had your assessments and mental health evaluations and said you're cleared to carry, you're level-headed to carry, then carry. But I don't feel like any human being, even myself, if I am not a law enforcement officer and I am not ex-military, need an AR-15 and AK-47 on my back.
Okay, so based off of
that's an assault rifle designed to kill. It is not designed to protect yourself. You don't need it.
Okay, and
it's
so based off
mass shootings, that's what it was created for.
Okay, so based off of the Indiana, the Greenwood Mall shooting, I'm trying to understand your perspective on that specifically. I know you say you don't believe people should have AR-15, but are you saying that guy was wrong, or I mean, because in Illinois, that same guy would have gotten
the shooter, in fact, was wrong, but the civilian that took him down, technically he did break the law for having the mall's codes, but he had lawfully a weapon to defend. So Good Samaritan law covers him, and he rightfully carried his weapon, so nothing should happen to him at all. He was licensed to carry properly.
Okay. So I'm gonna get some more thoughts on this. I mean, what are your guys' thoughts on these different mass shootings? You have a strict state with gun laws, and you had this terrible mass shooting, and then you had this very openly carry state with the mass shooting, but someone was able to take him down because someone had a gun. So I want to know your guys' thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'd say like a historical observation. I might just kind of go all over the place with this, but let's bring it back a little bit and talk about the Black Panthers. All right, so the Black Panthers were essentially community police force, essentially. I mean, the original goal was to protect their community against police brutality, but not just really police brutality. It could just be protection for anything. They also had a legal clinic. They had other services. But essentially my point is the community had its own self-defense force. If anything that was most akin to the Second Amendment or the founding fathers, it was essentially them. Formulation of a well-regulated militia, which is essentially what they were. And so I would say going to Illinois, which is also essentially one of the headquarters of the Black Panthers with Fred Hampton and whatnot, essentially these laws kind of contradict that. So if you want to say in the sense that the community should have groups like that to help protect themselves against gang violence, because the closest thing to any kind of invasion force that we have in the modern area would be a gang. And going back to the whole immigration thing, a lot of places in Mexico where they have problems with the cartels, these civilians will do the exact same thing because either the police force is unable or unwilling to give them the support that they need. So I would say the Illinois laws contradict that. They prevent people from protecting themselves in an organized fashion against gang violence. Because of that, you see what happens. You see that these people can go out and do drive-bys and whatnot. And essentially, that's where I see problems with the Illinois laws. I know they're well-intentioned, but they kind of contradict that. They contradict that founding principle that the community should be able to get together and have. And I think going to like the laws, the background checks and whatnot. So I get that there should be background checks, but I also think because a lot of times they need 16 hours of practice before you can. Perhaps, I mean, I don't have all the answers. Perhaps there should be an expedited way, a way for example, if you feel like you're at risk, then perhaps there's another process that you could do to make it expedited. Say, oh, well, here's a copy of a police report I filed. Here's a copy of medical reports from me being shot in the past that all illustrate that I'm at risk. And because of that, I should be able to have my gun faster. I should be able to, meet with my community. We should be able to arm ourselves quicker and easier to protect ourselves against this impending threat. And that's why I feel like Illinois really, is a slap in the face to the Second Amendment, because not only does it criminalize a lot of innocent black people, a lot of innocent people, not just black, innocent people just get thrown in prison, get a felony for this, but especially black people. So then you compare that to Indiana. Indiana, you had this guy, it's quote, good guy with the gun versus a bad guy with the gun. That's all great and everything. But I mean, there's really not a whole lot to say about that. A guy wanted to shoot a bunch of people in a mall and he got shot. So that's really what the Second Amendment was for. Now, it could have gone sideways. Perhaps somebody would have thought he was the mass shooter and shot him. Like, there's a scenario they say, oh, this person with a gun started shooting people. Oh, I shoot him. Then they think I'm the shooter. Then someone shoots me. Then someone sees them shoot me. Then they shoot him. I mean, yes, that's possible, but at the same time, there are these things. So, essentially, Indiana just kind of happened the way that something like that would happen. You go out and start shooting people. Somebody who's armed for self-defense is going to shoot you to protect himself. All right. And so I don't have a lot of qualms or anything about the Indiana situation, but it's the Illinois one that irks me most, especially when looking at the history of it, especially with the Black Panther history. And that's essentially all I have to say about that.
Right. And in addition, I'd like to add about the mass shootings. If you notice the pattern of mass shooters, they're always shooting people in vulnerable places. Mm-hmm. It's always the innocents, parades, movie theaters, concerts, churches. So it's ironic. Some of the legislation is you can carry, but you can't carry in these very same places I just mentioned, where like most of the mass shootings occur. There's something that's very attractive to a mass shooter to kill vulnerable people. The study of most of them, and mass shooting is defined as 4 or more who are killed. It's in vulnerable places, innocent people. It's very seldom does a mass shooter come in and attack. There's a few exceptions. Attack a place where people that the mass shooter knows are armed.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that too as well. Going back to the whole history point, I'll bring it back even further from the Black Panthers and Reconstruction. When they had the black codes to say blacks can't own guns or made it very difficult for them to own guns, lynchings and racial violence went through the roof. So they went hand in hand. So you could even say perhaps gang violence, if people could protect themselves with it, that could be essentially a self-regulating force. Now, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't say like, oh, that's definitely the answer, but it's just very interesting in that observation that, like my dad just said, like when people are vulnerable, they become susceptible to more violence.
And related to even in Carolina, Mr. Williams, I forget his first name, Williams, they armed themselves from the racial violence, and they had earned respect. They didn't get that. But Brandon's linking of the lack of guns to the lynchings makes the case about that vulnerability.
Yeah. There's so much there. I want to get to this one comment by Alexander. He said Illinois is already quote unquote open to carry, so to speak. I guess you mean because a lot of people carry guns anyway. Things possibly can get worse if they are implemented. Emotional health and mental health is of greater concern. And I saw that Malcolm made a comment. I think he was clapping for Brandon. I think he liked what you were saying. So thank you guys for your comments, and feel free those who are listening. I know we got a couple of people, we got a lot of people listening, so please comment. So, if
I could just do one more quick observation.
Sure, no problem.
I think too, really, it's not really about like which one's better, Illinois law or Indiana law. I think really the real thing to like curb the violence, a lot of it goes to the public education system. Because like as Natalie was saying earlier, she did courses on how to maintain your gun, how to how to acknowledge the power of a firearm, and it's really not just education about firearms itself, but it's just straight up the quality of education. See, if you have people exposed to a good education, good system, then you essentially have people who see there's better opportunities than just being in the gang. So it's kind of like that phrase from Frederick Douglass: "It's better to build up strong children than repair broken men." So in that, I think that's kind of what it boils down to a lot in the safety of the community. And so it's not just like which laws about guns are better, but you should go, the background of that should be who builds strong children, who provides for their people better, and not just the wealthy, but just the people who are less privileged.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I know Cliff in our last episode mentioned that the reason why a lot of the strict gun law places are so heavy with crime is because of population. He basically said because they're heavily populated, you're going to get more crime because there's a lot of people there. And so I followed up with a question of, well, so are you saying that if these gun laws were not in place, that there would be an increase in crime? And he said that, no, he thinks that the gun laws essentially has no effect on the crime. It's going to be crime in heavily populated cities regardless. So I thought that was an interesting point, and I want to kind of talk about our personal experience within the criminal system. And I have two stories that I wanted to share. So, I'm a defense attorney. I was a former prosecutor, worked with Natalie. And so I seen a little bit of both sides. In Indiana, now I work in different counties as a public defense. I mean, not public defender, but as a criminal defense attorney. And so certain counties choose to enforce the gun laws differently. Okay, so you can go to Lake County or another county, and you can get, if you have your first time offender with and you was carrying a weapon, you're a first time offender, they typically give you a break. Okay, they'll give you a diversion agreement or probation or something along those lines, right? Then I will go to another county, and even if you are a first time offender, they're giving you 90 days jail or 90 days house arrest. Okay, and I think that that's definitely unfair, and this is in the same state. But the reason that they said that they were these certain counties that were harder on certain people was because they said that this is to help end violence. This is to help slow down violence. That was their reasoning. Okay, and some of the people that are represented, for example, how one guy carrying a handgun without a license, he was an Uber driver. He just didn't feel safe not carrying. He didn't feel safe, not having a weapon while he was Uber driving. Okay, and so that's why he had carried a handgun. Then we had another guy who was caught carrying a handgun. He had just got shot a few years ago. And so he didn't want to, get caught up in that same situation again without a gun. Now, both of these people actually went through the process. They got delayed or whatever, but they didn't want to take that risk of not having a gun while they were out there trying to make a living. And one of my clients in particular, I remember his story. and I'm still working on his case. But one of my clients in particular, he literally had no family. So if they were going to sentence him to 90 days in jail, not only was he going to lose his job, and he was going to have to lose his place, and he was trying to get on the right path, but it was like they're trying to stop violence, by implementing this 90-day jail rule for first-time offenders, and they're basically putting them in my opinion, they're putting them back, making him very vulnerable to go back to, old devices and get involved in crime and stuff like that, because they're making him lose his legitimate job. And then I have a case where a young 17-year-old in Illinois, it's not my case, but someone from a family member in Illinois, he was dealing with a crazy ex-girlfriend who was trying to kill him and a whole bunch of stuff, and she was known to carry guns. And so he decided, after they had this one big incident, he decided, I'm gonna carry this gun with me as I go to college. So, he was only 17 years old. Oh no, he's 18. He's 18 years old. But in Illinois, he was facing a level 4 felony because he had a weapon with a bullet in it. And that particular county, was going to sentence him to a year in jail. And through prayer and miracles, they was able to give him probation, but he still has level 4 felony and on his record, and he still has to deal with the consequences of that. So, I just brought those two stories to show like how these gun laws are really affecting people. Like, there's people in the media that talks about, oh, these laws work and blah, 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 and they don't or whatever. But we actually are in the field. We see it. And so I want to know, what are your thoughts, if you guys want to respond to anything I said, but what are your thoughts as you are in the field, working with people? And I know, Professor Carter, you're a teacher and, you're in the field as well, but what have you seen when it comes to gun laws and how it affects society? So anybody can respond. I'm going to just get to the two comments. Outdoor Esquire says, shout out to all the Valpo alum. Yes, Valpo is strong in the building. Great to see Professor Carter. Professor Carter got a shout out. I got a lot of fans here. Quan said, wow, and ridiculous. Thanks for commenting, Quan. So anybody want to respond on their personal experience as being attorneys, and what have you seen when it comes to gun law?
Well, can we say this, and then you're sort of piggybacking on, I think Brandon related a lot of that already. Is becoming like the new Jim Crow, like the old drug offenses. And the guns now are used as that weaponry to get more Black people in prison and in jails. And that's what the Professor Israel was saying in your last show. The public defenders have been writing articles in the Chicago Tribune and in the New York Times, and all over the country. They're seeing this pattern here. And so that's of news to no one. The issue is what we're going to do about it, and hitting, and you find these strange alignments. The public defenders are arguing with the NRA, in this regard. And I see this whole, the push, the legislative push is what this is doing, instead of recognizing, like, white people love guns. The American culture has romanced guns to the T. Our Westerns, our movies, and we haven't even got, I'd like to hear Brandon and maybe Natalie's perception about video games and this impact on gun culture and things. And so, yes, we see this Jim Crow pattern. Brandon has mentioned it several times, that it's ensnaring, and so did Professor Israel, innocent people here. And they don't have the license. They didn't go through the proper way. Whereas as Professor Israel is hitting, some people have the luxury of time to go through the proper way and take the time to get the FOID card and the license in Illinois. It's pretty funny. You need both.
Right.
And it's becoming a prior restraint. The Second Amendment is for Black people in terms of the factual consequences. I'll leave it at.
Yeah,
Sure.
I would say also that, yeah, in Illinois, they have things too, like for first-time offenders. In some districts within Cook County, they're more available than others. Like in Bridgeview, they have this thing called the GROW program. Whereas for your first-time offense, and I think if you're below a certain age, you can do some courses on education, and then if you complete them, then it's dismissed, which is very good. But they have it for, it's kind of limited. So you have to be below a certain age. I forgot what exactly the age is. But even with that, I've only really seen it implemented in Bridgeview. I haven't really seen it available a lot in the other districts within Cook County. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a step in the right direction at least. But I think they should increase the age of it, because I think it was like you have to be like 21. But like most of the people who I see with these offenses are 25. Like they're close to the age, but like if you don't meet that cutoff, right at 21 or something like this, then oh well. But at least it's a step in the right direction, I think. But then also, at least another observation is, I think we mentioned. Oh, first I'll say this. Also, Illinois laws, it's like a fish net. They think of a fish net. When fish pass through it, they get caught up and snared. And it's not just for Illinois people, for even out-of-state people passing through. And, sometimes I've talked to Indiana people who said, I was just gonna pass through. I was actually on my way to Iowa. Then I got pulled over for this traffic thing, and they found I have a gun.
That was my client.
Now all of a sudden I'm in jail. Like, what's happening? So yeah, I mean, and there are statutes too. I think now, I don't know, it seems like 430 ILCS like 66 or something like this, where if you have an out-of-state license, you could essentially kind of work your way out and have that use that as a defense if you have an out-of-state license. But there are all these other caveats to it, like you have to mention it to the cop, beforehand. So who is gonna say like, "Oh, officer, I got a gun"? It's all these other things. So essentially, I guess I'm kind of digressing, but the laws they're a bit too strict, like I mentioned earlier. But what I was also gonna say is, at the same time, we keep going back to the self-defense thing, but a lot of it too is just kind of just unwise decisions by a lot of clients. Like, we can't always chalk it up to saying like, oh, this gang, they showed up in town and they're trying to rob us. A lot of times, the guy I had a client, I said, why do you even have this gun? He's like, oh, somebody's on the street and just offered it to me for $100. And I was like, so he just had it. He didn't really have it for something, but he just had it because it was available. So a lot of times too is just making the availability of guns, taking it off, or making them less accessible. So I can see once again, I can see why Illinois wants to become harsher on gun accessibility, because a lot of times they'll just acquire a gun through very simple means, through street means. But at the same time, just like the marijuana argument is, you can sometimes address the availability on the street by just making them more accessible in a legal means. So just like now there's like all these private marijuana vendors, you can get them this easy. But before it was when it was more criminalized, you saw it more on the street and it became more penalized on the street and things like this. So I think, another simple solution could be in kind of having a marriage between the Illinois and Indiana laws, just kind of more so having the vendors, giving the vendors more power, but at the same time educating the people to know what they're acquiring and to acquire it in a safer and legal means.
Right. And a few things I know you, Natalie. I'm sure you have a lot you want to say, but so I think that's one thing that really, really irritates me though with the law is because you're right. People make dumb decisions, right? And we all have a share. I'm sure Professor Carter is perfect in his lifetime, but the rest of us, have made dumb decisions, especially when we were young. Okay, when we were young adults. And granted, there's consequences for every single decision. But does that mean that if you make a simple mistake, like not knowing, Indiana's gun law when you're passing through to get some gas or whatever, does that mean that you deserve jail time? Or does that, vice versa, if you just pass through Illinois for, I don't know, see your sick grandmother, does that mean you deserve jail time because you didn't understand the Illinois gun laws? I would say no, right? I would argue no, right? I think we need to give some people more grace. I think these laws, are hurting, like you said, it's been clear, innocent people, right? But I know, Allie, I know you're a former prosecutor. You've handled all types of cases. What are your thoughts? And also, we're going to get to the comments here. Kyle said, amazing podcast. And Quan said, the government's main concern is control. They prioritize that over safety. And I got a text from Outdoor Esquire, and that's Shannon Buhari, another guest of the podcast, friend of the podcast. So he wanted to make sure he shout out Professor Carter. I don't know why he's trying to get good graces with you. He's not in your class anymore.
Well, can I say something? Shannon, who you had on the show last time? No, Shannon, like Brandon, they know guns. They shoot all kinds of guns, and Shannon was playing it really cool. In terms of his awareness of it, Shannon also knows watches, by the way, as well as law, but I think, and before Brandon leaves, if you could still hit the romancing part of gun, because to me, you're still talking around it, Justin, about guns, Should we have the law? You get to understand the impact, the romanticization of guns in American society, in American history. It won the West because of the guns. It suppressed the Indian cultures, the Civil War. To understand the power, the extreme power of that weapon in American history and where we're going, and colonization, then I think you can get more into what we need to do to address and to recognize, because a lot of blacks feel a guilty consciousness just having a gun. You showed that video last time of the woman on the Joy Behar. She was criticizing this one black woman, making her feel guilty for having the gun. Right. I think that in that kind of video, there's a lot of guilt. In fact, you had it a few years back in the class.
Right.
You didn't like guns. You felt the guilty consciousness of even possessing a gun like that. Sure. And I think that's a big feeling in black, that guns and black people are demonized. Mm-hmm. Guns with white people are sanctified.
Right.
And we've got to address it. And Israel kept trying to hit it with that. He kept going the race, but it's, to me, I would want to hit it with the romancing, the culture, the video games, and all this aspect. As to answer Brandon's question, why does someone just pick up a gun like that? Because a gun is cool. A gun is there. A gun is pretty. A gun is art, like a sword in Japan. And understanding, it's the second, and the Bill of Rights, it's the second one, the gun rights. It has a hierarchy in it. So understanding the influence, the importance in American culture will be very helpful in terms of helping blacks understand that the downside of guns is suicide and depression and those kind of things. And that goes to Natalie's point about we need, associated with guns, this type of education with it, and Brandon's point. So I hope before the show is over,
no, definitely.
We back and forth on regulation, don't get anywhere,
Yeah, we could definitely talk about that for sure. But I know, Natalie, I had you on ice for a while.
Yeah.
But if you want to talk about, your personal experience as being a former prosecutor, law enforcement, now criminal defense attorney, or anything we've said so far.
Well, as a prosecutor, well, first of all, in law school, Justin, we all in Brandon, we learned first thing, ignorance of the law is what? No defense. It's no defense. Like, just because you don't know the law gives us no defense. And no matter what state we go, I didn't know this law existed. It really doesn't matter. You broke the law. It doesn't matter if you didn't know what it was. But, as a prosecutor, I did give those chances to people who, first timers didn't have a gun license. I said, okay, get your gun license, bring it back to me. and I'll dismiss. Or take a gun safety class along with it. Show me proof. Go to Blythe's, go to Point Blank, show me proof of your gun safety class, I'll dismiss. Now on the defense attorney side, the gun cases I deal with are all federal. So there's not really much help for those people. Because they've had multiple opportunities to get it right. At that point, I'm just kind of trying not to get them to die in prison at this point, in regards to that. But personally, as a prosecutor, Justin, I tried mostly homicides in my last few years in Lake County. I pissed a lot of people off. I got death threats on me and my son. Hence the reason why I started to recarry again in public. My concealed and carry was vital to me because listening to a detective was listening to jail calls one day and heard my name and my son's name and where my son went to school.
What?
And he called me and he told me about it. You just heard my son in the background. And he told me about it. That they knew where I lived, where my son went to school. So I was ready.
Mm-hmm.
I was ready. Because what you're not going to do is threaten my kid. You can threaten me, but you're not going to threaten my kid. Mm-hmm. So thankfully, nothing ever happened. Thank the Lord. But that's the reason why I started to carry again, because I didn't want to take that chance that somebody would approach me or try to approach my son. And I have been approached in the store of people who were upset that, quote unquote, I sent their relatives to prison. Well, no, your relatives sent themselves to prison. I just proved them guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. But as Professor Carter's standpoint of romancing of the guns, and I'm a 70s kid, and my dad was born in the 30s, and so I grew up watching The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and Gunsmoke, and Two Views for Sister Sarah, and all those with my dad. Westerns on Saturday was a staple. That was every day. That's something, and he watches Westerns every day. But it didn't romance me, I guess to say, in any of us children in the household of wanting to carry guns, even though my oldest brother was in the military. My middle brother never went to the military or law enforcement whatsoever, but he's a gun owner now. But I went into law enforcement, but it was never like, ooh, we gotta touch it. Ooh, we gotta. That wasn't that way in our household. But I do see some aspect of it with video games with my son, and I kind of try to restrict that with him. And because he's like, "Ooh, that's cool," and I tried to take him to the range one day to shoot a BB gun, and he was just way too excited and didn't want to listen. I said, "You're not ready. You're not old enough." So when he gets a little bit older, and I think he's a little bit more mature, to understand the power behind it and the responsibility, then I'll go that route. But I do believe that there is some romancing there, that people don't really understand the power behind handguns altogether, which the education does play a big part in it. And I do think that there should be some laws put into place regarding mental health checks and evaluations that go along with it. You have to be responsible if you're going to carry a handgun openly in the community. You have to be.
Yeah. And thank you for that. And I do want to transition to solutions because I just wanted to make sure we really brought out the problems that we have. And I know Professor Carter wants to talk about romance and guns.
Because Justin, because I think this is too narrow.
Okay.
And to deal with this issue, and we got to get into, there was one case where cops were accused of shooting this guy, and it was discovered that before they even went out, they were in the basement playing these wild video games. And the theory of this defense attorney was that ramped them up. But the question I've been dying to ask of those who do play video games, which is Brandon and others, maybe, is what's the relevance? You see in the movies the dead people walking and the shooting, it's that glory to shoot. Does that have an impact on mass shooters or this or that? Does the video games have an impact on mass shooters or on shooting in itself? Or is it a therapy from shooting? What do you think, Brandon?
It's just pure entertainment. Like it's almost kind of an exhausted, argument to say, oh, video games are causing harm to people. There's a game called Mortal Kombat. Incredibly violent. Incredibly violent. But after I played that game, did I start ripping people in half and karate chopping people? No, I never did any of that. So
what could it do it to other people?
Same thing with these gun games. I mean, I'll say Americans in general glorify war to a degree. Perhaps in our history, we never had an invasion on us. We never really suffered something like Poland or France or whatever, in World War II. But that's a whole other conversation, But it's not just Americans, People play these games in Poland and France and all these other England and Japan. Everybody loves it. This is entertainment, It's a way to live a life that you're not going to live. I'm not about to enlist and go join some foreign war. I don't want to do that. But I'll play a game where I'm doing that, So, and then to go to, I guess, so there's an allure. And of course, is interesting. And then just weapons in general, are having a allure to them. Interesting observation. I just kind of thought about while we're having this podcast is, at least in my conversations with other people, other Black people, a movie, they weren't inspired to get a gun from watching 12 Years a Slave or from watching Rosewood, but Django Unchained, yes. Yes. So many people heard that they were very interested in buying a gun. And interesting, in that movie, Django had 16 hours of practice, because he, after he got liberated, there's a whole montage where he's practicing in the snow, the firearm, and there was a scene where they said, what they'll call you? The fastest gun in the South. I love that line. That's one of my favorite quotes of that movie. But he had practice. He didn't just pick up a gun and just go off to rescue his wife. He practiced for quite a long time. So there's the allure right there of seeing somebody who looks like you, armed, to take up a righteous cause. And in that movie, he also practiced gun safety. he had practice, and he utilized that practice to become essentially the fastest gun in the South. So, yeah, that's just kind of my take. But going back to what you were saying before about video games, no, it's just entertainment. In the same way that someone can enjoy a movie, a cowboy movie or something, there's entertainment. But of course, there's always that bridge, because it's kind of like which came first, the chicken or the egg, Mm-hmm. There's the guns were already interesting. And so that's why they make cowboy movies. If guns were boring, they wouldn't be making a whole genre of how people who utilize guns to fight bad guys. So the movies didn't come first; the guns came first, and it was because these directors and producers and moviegoers were interested in guns that they made the movies and they watched the movies. So, yeah.
Which relates to another byproduct separately from going to the gun range, which totally surprised me. There's almost a therapeutic value. Several of me and my friends, after they go to the gun range, you say, I feel better. There is this therapy that happens. It's almost magical. You feel like a little bit better. Do you feel? Yeah, I feel better. And so it's strange in terms of assessing the attraction of the guns here, and to me, the demonization of guns is only related to the bad things. Makes it convenient for suicide or domestic violence. Those kind of things have to be dealt with. So that's a huge issue. And that was holding me back a lot, getting, am I mentally sound? Is my kid mature? As Natalie was relating, you got to assess all these other products. What if your kid finds a gun? You didn't, they're very curious and they find it. And so all these things go into the mix. But in terms, it's just still demystified and you understand it. Once you break a gun down and you can build it back up, it no longer scares you. Right. And then that goes into the picture. That doesn't answer your question, Justin, about how that stops crime, but it does answer the question about the importance of realizing that the Second Amendment is something it's about power for everyone. And there's these impediments that are historically have been happening, that are currently happening, that's stopping Black people from sharing in that power, because the gun is potency.
Yeah, I mean, in regards to solutions, Justin, just I think I touched on this before. For solutions, I think, of course, we should have the background checks to make sure they're sound in mind. And of course, they should do criminal checks to make sure they're not, criminal leniency. But as I mentioned before, I think there should be an expedited way for people who are at risk to acquire a gun. It shouldn't all just be in the same procedure, because somebody living in, Smallsville, where everybody like, howdy neighbor, how you doing? There's no danger, is different than somebody living in a place where there's all this violence all the time. I like somebody who's been carjacked Monday and mugged Tuesday and then held at gunpoint Wednesday. Yeah, so they should have a way to say, to show all these things of how they're at risk and still provide proof that they're of sound body and mind, and be able to get their gun faster. Because I think really that won't defeat the purpose of why there's a Second Amendment, and the people who need them most will be able to acquire them in reasonable fashion.
I agree with that, Brandon. We want to say in Indiana, if you do have a domestic violence situation, you have a no contact order or protective order, there is a clause in the small print that people don't really realize and see that woman can immediately go and purchase a handgun as long as she has that protective order on her person. That gives her the ability to go purchase one right then and have it on her concealed. Yeah, that's written on the protective order in the state of Indiana, and most people don't really realize that, but it does. I do want to make a difference, like when we talk about changing, and the mental health is so big here, and I want to know these mass shootings, there's a difference between psychopath and sociopath. While I was at Valpo, I did also get my master's degree in psychology in that dual degree program. Yay, Valpo. So most of these mass shootings are done by people who are psychopaths are very different than sociopaths. Psychopaths can hold jobs, they maintain, they're calm, they're cool, they're collected. Most of them are highly intelligent, highly functioning, the Jeffrey Dahmers of the world, the ones that you don't know are killers until they're like 20 dead bodies, but the sociopaths are our mass killers. They're impulsive. They don't socialize. They don't play well. They have a history of, setting fires early on, killing cats, things of that nature, things that parents see early on that their children just aren't right, or something just not quite right with little Johnny. And they don't want to necessarily label their child as that, so they don't say anything. But I think it needs to be some accountability in there. So these mental health evaluations and psychological checks are necessary to try to help curb these mass shootings.
Well, related to what Natalie said, the big problem in the mass shootings was when Congress allowed that assault weapons ban to expire. That guaranteed mass shootings. And it's related to this because related to the assault weapons, the AKs, ARs like that, they're very addictive. These gunmen, you just spray, it's like smoking, it's very addictive. Some of the solutions that have been found is people are suing the gun manufacturers. They're suing the gun manufacturer, and they've won. In Sandy Hook, they've won because the gun manufacturers, based on their their advertisements, the magazines, the attractiveness of the guns, the allure of the guns, and then soon the addictive quality of being able just to spray and mow everything down. A little bit different than the singular gun things. There's something added, that added feature and power of a machine type of a weapon. That guaranteed way more mass shootings. But the ban is like, now there's 400 million guns out in America today.
Yes.
Trying to pass legislation now, it's as I said, it's laughable. The guns are there. A typical gun can last almost a century.
Yeah.
Pass all the guns are already there.
Also, going to the solution thing.
Yeah, I was going to get on that. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, return to the solution thing as well. There actually is, for the UUW statutes, there is an affirmative defense of self-defense for the UUWs, but it's a little limited. It's quite limited. It's just, it's obviously if someone's like about to kill you and then you just happen to grab a gun that you don't have a license for and you shoot them, then that can be an affirmative defense and you can use that to possibly get your case dismissed. But I think that should possibly be expanded to include people who are at risk too. So before I mentioned, to show that you're at risk for acquiring a gun, I think they should also be more accepting in those at-risk situations for dismissing gun charges as well, because currently it's pretty limited in how you can dismiss it for that reason. So I think really just the solution is realizing the fact that not everybody's situation is the same. Not everybody acquired a gun for the same reason. Some people thought it was just interesting versus somebody honestly felt like they need one because if I don't have one, something bad will happen to me very soon. And the self-defense doesn't necessarily have to mean that someone's right about to kill you. A lot of times there's situations that lead up to that, where if perhaps they even had a gun, if the aggressor knew that this person had a gun, they would not even have gone that far later on in time. Because for example, let's say your gang or whatever is like scouting out places, or let's say they see you and they say, hey, give me your money or something like that. And I say, no. And they say, all right. Later on this week, I'll show you why you should have given me that money or whatever. And so, but perhaps if in that situation between now and then I acquire a gun and I say, I have this just in case, because obviously this guy has something against me, wants to hurt me in some way, shape, or form, so I'm going to get one. But then between Monday and Friday, I get pulled over and they see I have a gun, then I'm the one with the charge. So from the solutions, I think that's honestly the best solution, just to realize that there are these different caveats and situations that might warrant a dismissal, instead of just being hungry for a conviction and throwing another person in prison, just be more understanding of the situations that people face.
Yeah, I wish you can talk to some of the prosecutors I talked to, but they don't see it that way. No, but I appreciate you guys' comments. But let me get to some of the comments out here. Outdoor Esquire said Clinton had the biggest and the best guns. Quan said, yeah, you have to also make the argument that rap music makes people go out and commit violent crimes. Interesting.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't.
No, it does not.
No, it does not.
Okay.
It's almost kind of like that reefer. Let's bring this. Actually, there's a lot of similarities between guns and marijuana for this. Like, there's a movie that came out a long time ago called Reefer Madness, where this guy like smokes a joint and he goes out and like does all this crazy stuff. Like, I think he kills somebody. All because he smoked a joint. And it's kind of like that whole thing. Like, they see something that, just some outlet. It's almost kind of like scapegoating. You can't just always equate rap music to violence. You can't equate movies to violence. You're gonna equate people to violence, and it's not just so it's the person. It's their tendencies, perhaps their state of mind, what's going on in their background, and to be honest, it's it's all well and good that they want to do background checks, but like someone could easily still lie in a background check. I mean, it's not like it's like this crystal ball to say, oh, like based on this, he will for sure be a good person or a bad person. Ted Bundy, everybody loved Ted Bundy. He went to law school, he was smiling at people, high fiving people in the hallway and stuff. And then he ends up doing all this. He caught everybody by surprise. John Wayne Gacy, he got along with a lot of people in this community, and he, we all know what he did. That was in Indiana. So it's not like a catch-all. So just because it's like this, and so I'm kind of digressing again, but the cut and dry of it is rap music doesn't do this. It's entertainment purposes. Just listening to a beat. I'm not gonna listen to Yo Gotti and just shoot somebody in the head the next day. So it's just a tired argument.
No, that's a bad argument. And as a music connoisseur, as a musician myself, rap music started off in the 70s, and it was all dance music and party music. And when the reference to NWA came out, and we got West Coast rap, they were talking about the gang violence and against police brutality they were facing in Chicago, in California at the time, what they were facing at the time. It was not about them out there shooting guns and attacking people. It was against police brutality they were facing as a community. It has nothing to do with gun violence amongst themselves and shooting other people. No, sir, it does not. Rap music does not predate gun violence. No.
Of course, you're gonna explain Tupac and Biggie and all that, and some of the other stuff.
There was a rapper. I forgot which rapper it was who was addressing the argument about how come you guys always advocate for it. A lot of times, a lot of these rappers have come from very impoverished areas, and they say, "Well, we rap about stuff that we were exposed to. So if you want us to rap about it, then change the situation, change what we're exposed to. Better the education, better the environment that's created for at-risk youth. And so maybe if you gave us a better upbringing, we wouldn't be talking about the drugs and guns that keep getting exposed to us."
Right.
So,
I think it would be naive to say that rap music doesn't have any effect on the Black community and any effect on violence. I mean, Carter brought a huge example, Biggie and Tupac. I mean, he brought a lot of, and literally two coasts that was going at war. I mean,
they were going at war. So
they were friends. They were friends.
Not when he got shot. They were friends at that point.
The beef wasn't between Biggie and Tupac. The beef was between their producers.
Yeah, we know the background, but I'm saying I don't think it's totally irrelevant. It's still it's.
But outside of Biggie and Tupac, which honestly, whole thing about violence goes to the people. I would say if you want to just bring that back to Suge Knight and how much of a maniac Suge Knight was, which I mean, a lot of that boils back down to him. So honestly, once he went to jail, you don't really hear about other rappers getting. Young Dolph got shot or something like that, but that wasn't by another rapper. I think he was in his community, and then somebody did. So I would say, yes. I mean, it's not absolute. There's no zero influence that it can have. Of course, it can have some kind of influence. But if you already there, if you're already tense or mad about your situation, and say, but you can say that for any kind of aggressive music, right? Not just rap. If I'm already mad, if I'm already, in the mood to kill somebody, if somebody already angered me, and I'm already there, and I'm listening to metal, that's not gonna assuage. It's not gonna be oh, I'm glad I turned off that rap and listened to metal instead. No, I mean, it's just,
but I mean, music affects culture, right? Movies affect culture, right? So it's not it's just some little drop in the bucket. No, it affects culture.
It does have influence.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not the end all solution. Everybody just stop listening to rap music and everything goes well.
I wouldn't
so
say
we're gonna blame R. Kelly for all the babies that were born too.
You said what?
We're gonna blame R. Kelly for all the illegitimate babies born in the 90s. Because everybody was listening to R. Kelly and bumping and grinding. If we're gonna have all these babies that was born with you know what I'm saying? You can't blame music for everybody's personal decisions.
Right. No, but music affects you, right? And I give a quick example, and we actually close the time, but I was watching Finding Nemo yesterday, right? And I was with my daughter, when Nemo found his dad, I kind of hugged my daughter a little bit tighter, right? I wanted to, it influenced me, right? So entertainment influence you. I don't think it's the end all solution. I think that a lot of people put too much attention on that. Like, oh, let's just get rid of rap music. No, we need to, get people out of poverty. We need to support people in their businesses. We need to do a lot of different things. I want to just wrap up because I know time is tight, and I know people have other things to do. But one thing I wanted to say is that, because it's so easy to just talk about the solution. I mean, the problem. But I wanted to just say that I think that Brandon brought up a really, really good solution. I actually wrote it down. Just on my thoughts on it. I think that so my thoughts would be that maybe, if we're going to have a permit, for people to carry, also having exceptions to that permit, right? If someone's life is in danger, if someone is a public figure or, they're exposed to a lot of crime, blah, 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 have exceptions, right? And then also, if you're going to have a permit, that should include maybe some type of psychological evaluation. I know we didn't get into red flag laws, background checks, things like that. I think that if we can figure out some neutral things to check people, because everybody shouldn't be having a gun regardless, right? It's the truth. Also, I think that, if someone is caught, right, carrying a handgun without a permit and they don't follow under one of those exceptions, I think people deserve grace. Right now, if you're a crime, you got felonies or whatever, I understand that. But, first time offenders shouldn't be going. I don't think that's the route. Sending people to jail, I think that's causing the crime system to actually reoccur. You're hurting people by giving them felonies. Now they can't get certain jobs and blah, blah, blah. You're actually causing more crime that way. So I think people deserve grace. I think that also they deserve, you can also mandate, community service and all that, but I don't think sending people to jail and ruining people's lives over first or second time offense should be the solution. So we talked about a lot here today. We actually over time, but if anybody want to give, a 1 minute, I love for you guys we talked about so much, and I know we're over time, but if you could just give your 1 minute, any final thoughts that you want to make sure you share with the public, and then if you want to give out your information as well, if somebody wants to reach out to you for more.
You're in the state of Indiana and you're going to carry a gun, then I recommend you take a gun safety class.
Okay.
Know how to carry it, know how to use it properly.
Yeah, I mean, if you're from Illinois, get that FOID, get that concealed carry, because like you said, then if you have the FOID, right? It can't just be in your car. It's got to be unloaded. It's got to be away from the driver's seat in a box. Don't just have like a loaded firearm right next to you and say, "Oh, I got a FOID, I'm okay." It's got to be away from you, preferably in the back or even further in the trunk or whatever. I know it's kind of defeats the purpose of having it, but at least for this, have it there, have it unloaded, have it in a box, and you should be good if you got that FOID. And if you have to conceal carry, that makes things a whole lot easier. And then even if you have the concealed carry, then make sure you're not driving around and you're slightly intoxicated, because that could be a caveat to not allowing the concealed carry. So just be very mindful of all those things. Don't think you're home free just because you have a FOID, and don't think you're home free just because you also got a CCL.
I guess I'm more global. I think a gun is there. A gun is art. A gun is art. It's artwork and history of mankind, peoplekind, and with that, a gun is there to have it to restrain the heartless. People were going to attack. And look at Trayvon Martin's situation, going to the store to get Skittles and see what happens. A gun is there to restrain, and a gun is potency. And I think thinking of it that way, that is an attribute. That is an attribute to equal the playing field. And believe me, there's a lot of guns on the other side.
Yeah, I would say the Black Panthers kind of epitomize a lot of the topics in our podcast today. Because even, I touched on them before. One interesting fact is that the FBI had this campaign to demonize them for quite a long period of time. Yep. And then they would even support rival groups to also help in their, smear campaign. And so once the Black Panthers were taken away, you saw the rise of more street gangs. So it became like a kind of almost vacuum of power in the Black community that gangs refilled. So it's just a very interesting observation that when they took away the legitimate guns that were there, or the arguably legitimate guns that were there by the Black Panthers and the regulating police force or militia, you saw the replacement with illegitimate groups. And so it's just a very interesting point. And the fact that, like I said before, Fred Hampton and a large, group of the Black Panthers were located in Chicago, and the fact that they have these harsh gun laws in Chicago, I don't think is a coincidence.
Yeah, Panthers are demonized, but look at The Godfather. It's lionized. It's the most beautiful picture in terms of the differences, and that's what we want to equal.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much. This is a very distinguished panel. It's not often you get a criminal law professor, a criminal defense attorney, and a former prosecutor in the same setting, talking about issues. And so I really appreciate you guys for taking our time. And these are very distinguished, well-accomplished people. And so I really appreciate you guys. And thank you to all the people that listen. It's like our most highly watched show. I guess everybody wanted to watch Carter and see if they can take points at them, dig at them, or I don't know.
Thank you to everyone. Please, thank you for all the love too.
Yeah. We'll be back with another episode soon. But thank you so much for everybody who watched. And I'll put some information in below, and so you guys can follow and make sure you stay on track of these laws and these people. So, all right, talk to you guys soon. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.